Welcome to the PCN Captiol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Today the topic is the 2024 election, but first we're joined by Evie DeJesus, reporter from Penn Live and the Patriot News. Welcome.
Good morning, Larry.
A new survey came out that explores Pennsylvanians' opinions about immigration. How important is this issue in next month's election?
Well, as we all know and heard for months now, if not years, it's a huge issue. It's one of the biggest flashpoints in the election and, dare I say, divisive issue.
Now, Evie, I understand this survey is different than others because it offers what it calls a policy-making simulation. Just what is that? Explain, please.
Basically, the participants go through more or less sort of an educational process where they are educated on the topics, they're given all the facts, and then they are given the downsides and the upsides, consequential scenarios. So they really get a wide, breadth of sort of the factual background on an issue, and then they can use that to form their opinion.
So give me an example then. What was one of the situations the respondents were expected to respond to?
Well, I think, for instance, there was one issue about the idea of the 11 million undocumented immigrants estimated to be in the U.S. What to do with them? How do you resolve that issue? So participants were educated about, well, here's what it looks like. Here's what 11 million or an operation to round up, to detain, to deport 11 million individuals. What would that look like? And one of the things that was propped up in that was the idea that the U.S. The total U.S. prison population, and that includes, federal, state, county prisons and jails, is about 1.9 million individuals incarcerated. And we know the mammoth undertaking that is our prison system. So that's about 2 million people. So we're talking about 11 million undocumented immigrants, and the cost, it was in the billions. Let's see if I have it here in front of me, but it was in the billions what it would cost. $100 billion or more was estimated to detain, to run these large facilities. So based on that, respondents were asked to simulate their policy on this issue. And perhaps not surprisingly, a majority of the people who participated in Pennsylvania indicated, support for a moderate position in terms of offering a path to citizenship versus mass deportation. Mm-hmm. You still have people, about 28% of the people, mostly all Republicans, support mass deportation, but a vast majority of people, and this is across 6 swing states as well, supported the idea of a path to citizenship for people who've been here for decades and who are, have no criminal records.
It sounds like the respondents were given two choices then, basically, mass deportation or a path to citizenship, and you say the latter was the choice of most Pennsylvanians.
The path to citizenship.
And what would the path to citizenship consist of? In other words, that's a popular phrase. We hear it all the time. Just what would be involved? Was that addressed in the survey at all?
I don't think it was addressed directly. I do remember that there was something in there about sort of allowing more visas, broader visa protocols that would allow people to work. And I think it was narrowly defined in the sense of this would be for people who've been in the U.S. for decades. So it's not someone who's only been in the U.S. for 6 months. And again, for people who have no criminal records.
And also, let's explore that phrase, mass deportation, and we seem to be hearing more of that in recent weeks. And obviously, resources are involved in accomplishing that task. Was that addressed in any way in the survey?
Yes, the responders who were in favor of mass deportation indicated that they would be in favor of having local law enforcement, having the National Guard, and even the military be involved in that type of an operation. It's would sound like a pretty robust, almost military style operation.
What might the results of this poll mean to the candidates for president next month? Let's try to analyze it a little bit.
I don't see the needle moving, certainly in terms of the Republican rhetoric at the top of the Republican ticket. I don't see that rhetoric moving at all. If anything, it's become more sort of staunchly, extreme over the months. This is out of the University of Maryland, out of the School of Policy. It's the program for public consultation. They've been doing a series leading up to the election. They did one on abortion, and very similar results, where the majority of respondents in Pennsylvania and across the 6 swing states that were polled indicated a preference to more moderate abortion laws and not, total bans and whatnot. So it really mirrors, the immigration mirrors sort of the abortion. So we certainly have seen a lot of Republicans sort of walk back a little bit, get a little more, moderate sounding in their extreme abortion stance. So it'd be interesting to see if in the immigration sector, if it has any impact.
Thank you, Evie DeJesus from Penn Live and the Patriot News.
You're welcome. Thank you.
More of the PCN Capitol Preview after a short break. Welcome back. Our guests are Charlie Gerow, CEO of Quantum Communications, and Mike Stack, former Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania. Governor Stack, let's start with you. How motivated are Pennsylvanians to cast their vote in next month's presidential election?
Well, it's like I always say from the time I was a little kid. People seem enthusiastic to vote, or they've got a little anger about what's going on, and they want to charge to the polls. But with the oversaturation of advertising and the emotionalism of this election, the divisions going on in Pennsylvania, I think even though people are saying right now they're ready to storm out to the polls and vote for their candidate, that what it's going to end up is it's going to be a disappointing turnout. And I think that's an ongoing problem we have in Pennsylvania and America, that our turnouts are significantly below 50%. And I see some of the numbers about the predicted turnout. I think that they are more optimistic than they're going to be. And I think that is reflective of the tenor of the campaign. I think both candidates are speaking sort of negatively, and negative messages tend to suppress the turnout. So disappointingly, I don't think the turnout's going to be as high as it should be, but I still think the energy in this election is going to be huge. And I think this state, of course, being a battleground state, Pennsylvania, it's probably all going to come down to this state. And that's why the major candidates are spending so much time here, and both going into each other's turf, trying to get every possible vote, whether they're a traditional potential vote or some kind of hybrid that they think they can win. It's basically a house by house election.
Charlie, Mike talked about a lot of things there, but let's get back to the original question, which was about motivation for Pennsylvanians, and then we'll touch on some of the points that Mike brought up.
Well, let me disagree with Governor Stack right off the bat by saying that I think that the turnout is going to be very, very high. Maybe not record high, but darn close to it, because the question that you ask about voter intensity is that voters on both sides of the aisle are incredibly motivated. And the barrage of ads that Governor Stack referred to, I think, is indicative of what's going on. Oh, I'm tired of the ads. Of course they are, because you can't cut through the clutter. But the fact that there is this barrage suggests that both campaigns Republicans view Pennsylvania as the ultimate prize, and I think Governor Stack and I agree on that. And with that goes a tremendous enthusiasm, I think particularly on the part of Republicans, but I think voter intensity is ramped pretty high. And while you referred to it as next month's election, and technically it is, it's only 3 weeks away.
So what's setting this fire under candidates, or not candidates, but voters?
Well, I think on the Republican side, voters are just so appalled with what has happened over the course of the past 4 years, particularly with the economy, but also with the southern border, and they really, really want to change. And so they're out marking their calendars for how many days remain to election, and many of them are wisely voting early. You're seeing numbers of Republicans never before seen voting by mail now.
So, Mike, what do you think of these issues that Charlie brought up? Won't the economy, immigration bring people out to the polls?
Right. Charlie makes a very good point. And the interesting thing about border security is that it cuts both ways. It's not just a Republican issue anymore. It seems to transcend party, and a lot of folks are concerned about that. There are some nuances with Democratic voters, but I think mostly folks are concerned about that issue. And I think it was originally ramped up by Donald Trump and others, but I think it's turned into an issue that everyone's concerned about. Also, the economy is really interesting because the cost of everything is still ridiculously high. If you go into a supermarket, you're just like, this is absurd in this country. To have the prices that we see for basic items like bread, milk, and eggs, and then other stuff. On the other hand, the Wall Street's way up, the market is up, unemployment is down, inflation is down, and there's these other very favorable economic indicators going on that at the beginning of the administration, the Biden administration, we didn't see happening. So I think one of the attacks on Kamala has been that she's a partner in the Bidenomics economic plan, but the issue is that the economy is improving, notwithstanding how absurd the cost of living is, and home buying and issues that are really bread and butter issues to Pennsylvanians. So. I went off on some kind of tangent there, but somehow, some way, I do agree a little bit with Charlie.
Let's consider the latest polls. Charlie, you've seen them. Harris and Trump are virtually tied within that margin of error. Just why is this race so close? I remember in years past, you'd hear about candidate X or candidate Y winning in a landslide. You don't hear about that anymore.
Well, I think there's still the possibility of a near Electoral College landslide for Donald Trump, but there certainly isn't among the popular vote. I mean, Governor Stack alluded to it earlier. The country is sadly very deeply divided. And so you're going to see national polls reflecting a very, very tight race. A national poll that shows it very, very tight is very, very good for Donald Trump, because in that national polling are states like California and New York and Illinois, which are already solidly blue states that impact the national poll dramatically because of the number of people that live there. But when you get down to the battleground states and then the states that are locked in on the red side, where the populations may not be quite as large, you see Trump leading.
Charlie, go ahead, Mike.
Also, Larry, the thing with the mystery of Donald Trump is that he definitely has secret voters who will not necessarily answer a poll saying that they're going to vote for Donald Trump, but are contemplating it or are going to do it or have done it already. And so any close poll, I think, definitely favors Donald Trump.
I just didn't want to interrupt to thank Governor Stack for making a point that I neglected to mention.
Yes.
They used to call it the Bradley effect after Tom Bradley in Los Angeles, the African-American mayor there, who always outperformed the polls because voters, for whatever reasons, didn't want to tell pollsters that they supported him. You've seen that phenomenon with Donald Trump throughout his political career. He's always significantly outperformed the polls, and Governor Stack is right, and I thank him for making the point that I missed. There is a significant underpolling factor for President Trump.
Mike, let me ask you, and I'm going to ask Charlie the same question. Trump, of course, has run twice before, once successfully. We all know that. How is Donald Trump in 2024 any different than years past?
Well, clearly, he's an older guy. the amount of energy he has is absurd because he's also pushing 80, and we had the issue with President Biden, where folks were like, maybe he's just too old, and that became an issue. Although he's a year or 2 years older than Donald Trump. So, but there's no question about Donald Trump's energy. I mean, he's going places where she is not. He is on the ground a lot more, and I think that in a state like Pennsylvania, where people want to see you, I mean, Democratic candidates like Ed Rendell did that. He turned the electorate on its head in his race by just going out and meeting people. I think Trump does that. So he's a bit of a force of nature. What's he like in comparison to previous Donald Trump's? Well, he's got all the the infamy of these criminal charges and cases against him. He's been president before through challenging times where he was rejected by the polls, the voters, but now he's back again. And so what's he like? He's a force that won't go away. And there's no denying he's got some kind of super attraction to a large base of the polls, and he connects to anger and dissatisfaction. There's a lot of that going around. So I'll limit my answer to Donald Trump for now.
Charlie, how much are Trump supporters bothered by his criminal conviction for falsifying business records?
Pretty much zero. They recognize that the charges against Donald Trump were, to use a very bad pun, trumped up. They were brought by a Department of Justice that unfortunately has become corrupted. Many of them, as you know, are now on very, very shaky legal grounds. But if you noticed, again, we don't follow the polls as much as some other folks, but the polling always indicated that when Donald Trump had, quote unquote, charges brought against him or even a conviction, his support base went up. His enthusiasm base went up, not down. So I don't think that that's a factor for Trump voters. And let me just say, to follow up on what Governor Stack said, Trump's energy level is, as he said, incredibly remarkable. I mean, there are 35 and 40-year-olds that wish they could follow him around. And it's always been a curiosity to me, Gov, because he doesn't eat well. He eats, McDonald's trash, and he doesn't sleep well, doesn't exercise except to play golf. And he is getting up in years, and yet he's got this vitality and this energy that many of us really, really would like to have. And the issue with Joe Biden was never so much his age. It may have been age-related, but it was his cognitive abilities and his vitality. And there's no question about that with Donald Trump. His vitality is, as my friend said, remarkable.
And Mike, talk about that turning point in the campaign this year when Joe Biden's poor performance at the debate led to Kamala Harris being the nominee.
Right. So I think at the outset of his administration, he was definitely he ran a strong campaign, but I think the effects of it were already hitting him at the early stages of his term. And I think the opposition, shall I say, the Republicans, started making an issue of his cognitive ability, and I don't think it was unwarranted. And then I think that Democrats sort of rallied around him to protect him from these charges, basically saying, he's going to be able to present, he may be losing his step, but God forbid, we need President Biden. And I thought that was inauthentic. So I thought he was having problems well before he was exposed in the debate, where he had that moment of just blankly staring at the camera. I think years before that he had problems. And I think Democrats, should be responsible for that kind of thing. I mean, you've got to be open with the electorate. If the president is starting to fail, you have to not try and keep it a secret from the American people. You need to move on earlier. And that was a panic move. And basically, Joe Biden was overthrown by donors, and that's how we ended up with Kamala. And so I think she's much younger, and she can play the young card. But I think she's running a little bit away from people. She's doing, as it has been said in the media, she's choosing easier, softer targets than going out and addressing large groups of people or engaging voters like Trump does. And it may work for her playing it safe like that. It may not. It remains to be seen. I'm sure it's going to be a great source of discussion if it goes the wrong way for her. But so far, it's put her within the margin of error or in the lead playing it safe and soft and not exposing herself to the challenges, which the American people really want to know, like, what would you do in challenging situations? She's not really answering those questions.
Larry, just by the way, if I were
Sure.
in Congress, I would yield back some of my time to Governor Stack to continue to make that point, because he's spot on. I'm refreshed to hear a lifelong Democrat making the case that many are making, and which happens to be accurate.
Charlie, let's consider the geography of the campaign. It's always interesting to me to consider where the candidates are visiting in Pennsylvania. For example, Kamala Harris was in Erie over the weekend. Donald Trump was in Oaks, Pennsylvania. And what's the strategy in candidates visiting statewide certain locations?
Well, there are, these bellwether areas, and I don't honestly, Larry, know whether they really truly are or not. And I'd let Governor Stack throw in his opinion on that. But a lot of folks are telling us that Erie and Northampton counties are pivotal. I think that Luzerne is going to be pivotal. As you know, it just turned from Democrat to Republican by registration for the first time in a long time. I think that Bucks County may also prove to be very, very significant. Again, part of that Collar County quad around Philadelphia that has been increasingly Democrat over the course of the past couple of elections, but which just flipped back to Republican by registration. So the fact that Kamala Harris is in Erie is kind of ipso facto what you would expect her to do. Donald Trump going to Oaks is a little bit different because Montgomery County has, over the years, trended very, very strongly Democrat. So clearly, President Trump is making a plea to suburban voters, which have not been so kind to him in recent past presidential elections, and that's important. But let me just say this about geography real quickly. The appearance in Butler just a few days back was pivotal in my judgment, not only nationally, but here in Pennsylvania. They had, I'm told, over 100,000 people at that rally, which is phenomenal. We just don't have that here in the United States. And those iconic images of Donald Trump saying, fight, 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 were again seared into people's memory banks. And I think that will be a significant factor on November 5th.
So, Mike, what do you think about the way the candidates are deploying their resources statewide?
The thing about Kamala, just to reassure Charlie, I'm still Democrat, but she actually has a major economic footprint in the state as far as a ground game. She has major campaign offices set up throughout the state. She's, I think, hired 300 paid employees to operate, which is a large number for a national campaign. So she intends to be in the ground game. Nonetheless, once again, I go back to, and I think it's interesting that she would go to Erie, because this addresses the point, every vote counts, that you got to go to every corner of the state. She needs to do more of that. But the phenomenon, once again, of Donald Trump and the rallies with 100,000 people, it was something that in 2016 against Hillary Clinton, people were concerned about. They said these crowds are unreal. And she did not heed that warning. I think Kamala's doing a better job of getting her resources together, getting her ground game together in Pennsylvania. And I really do. I think I grew up as a committee person in my dad's ward, where you had to fight for every last vote till the polls closed. I really think this is going to come down to some of these folks who get paid, $15, $20 to work a polling place, who are going to be handing out ballots to the last moment, and I think they could change how the election plays out in the whole state, vote by vote. But it's exciting.
Mike, how much are voters thinking about the riot at the Capitol that tried to overturn the results of the 2020 election?
Well, I know at the outset there was a lot of fuel poured on that, and it's been poured a long time by mostly the Democratic side. Now, that was a horrible event, and a lot of people bear responsibility for that. But the fact is, I think it has lost its steam, and I think that's what happens in public policy issues that become campaign issues. The more that they run their course, they start to lose steam. They lose their freshness, and now people are back on issues related to border security, illegal immigration, crime, jobs, the cost of living in Pennsylvania, what our future is going to be. And ultimately, that's where I think people's focus is. And I don't think there are some folks that are still focused on that. I just don't think it has the amount of steam that it had a long time ago.
What do you think, Charlie? Has the subject of the riot at the Capitol about the 2020 election run its course, in Mike's words?
I think Mike is exactly right. This is really a terrible show because we're agreeing too much. But I think he's really correct. And it's not just this particular issue, but I think the point that he made is that these issues may be hot at one point in time, but over time they become less important. And for the folks that are waking up, sitting at the breakfast table, worrying about their family budget, worrying about buying groceries, they're not so much concerned about what might have happened on January 6th, 4 years ago. And I think that the issue of on-the-ground work, which Governor Stack talked about the Harris campaign doing, is being reflected on the Republican side in the earliest indication of what your ground game is doing, and that is voter registration. And as you know, Larry, the Republicans have collapsed that gigantic lead that the Democrats have had over as long as Mike Stack and I have been involved in. Both Mike and I.
Democrats are still ahead in Pennsylvania, though, aren't they?
Yeah, but by a very, very narrow margin, given what it was historically and previously, where Republicans did win election. I was just going to say.
And this is registration as opposed to actual voting.
Right. Oh, yeah, there's no question about it. And my Democrat friends, I think, correctly make the point that a lot of this voter registration shift is simply reflective of what's been going on by voters, Larry, for a long time, where there have been people that were registered Democrat but were voting Republican. They're now registering Republican. But I think, again, it does go to the boots on the ground, the blocking and tackling of politics, which are so vitally important, because to get those people to re-register requires some effort.
At the beginning of our program, Charlie, you mentioned the Electoral College, and often that isn't something that comes up until late, sometimes after the election. So let's get ahead of the curve here and just do a real basic short education on the Electoral College. How many electoral votes do we have in Pennsylvania, and how does the overall system work, briefly?
Our Electoral College is set up by the number of people that you have in Congress, plus the 2 United States senators for each state. Sadly, and I know Mike and I agree on this, Pennsylvania's Electoral College count has diminished dramatically over the years. We've lost congressional representation in each of the past censuses. And so, although we are still a gigantic electoral prize, we're not what we once were.
And Pennsylvania has 19 votes.
17 plus 2, yes.
The goal is to get to 270. So once a candidate gets to 270, they have an insurmountable lead. Is that it?
Well, they not only have an insurmountable lead, they have an absolute lock-sure constitutional number required to be elected.
And Mike Stack, tell us how you feel about the significance of the Electoral College. And sometimes we hear points pro and con on this system.
It's a strange phenomenon, because where every vote counts, and then ultimately when you do it at the Electoral College, you're talking about handfuls of people going down and casting votes for all of us. So it's worked. Our democracy, as much as we're a few hundred years old, we're still very young in democracy. And in these unbelievably turbulent times, our electoral system has worked. I think that we've had some major controversies over the years. The year I got elected to the state Senate, we had a lot of controversy with the Electoral College and George W. Bush and Al Gore. I think it's a system that's worked, so you can't argue against it. I think in this volatile election, it'll still become an issue where people will be bitterly opposed to it and not understand it. And I think it goes back to, Charlie might have pointed this out last time we were on the show, goes back to more Americans need to study civics, including kids right now, so they understand what's going on. And if they want to be critical and if they want to be outraged by something, they should have a background in knowing how it came about historically and why we have it today. And it really came about as a way of compromise and making sure that we had stability in our democracy. And you can't argue with the results that here we are, the greatest democracy in the world. But I'm sure it's going to come into play. And this country is going to be running on some volatile energy for time to come, and that's regretful, because it's only when we pull together can we succeed. But I think we're going to be divided after this election, no matter what.
Gentlemen, I'm going to give you a break just for a minute because we're going to look at program notes for here on PCN. Tomorrow, Focus on Aging Adults returns. With only weeks until the presidential election, the AARP of Pennsylvania has put out a new poll that shows what's on the minds of older voters. We'll talk issues and candidates tomorrow at 7 p.m. Then right after that, our series of one-on-one interviews with the candidates in the general election continues. First, at 8 p.m., we'll have Robert Calburn, Libertarian for PA Attorney General, followed at 8:30 p.m. by Rob McCurry, Republican for Congress in District 17. On Journalist Roundtable this week, we'll have Jan Murphy of Penn Live and the Patriot News, John Cole from the PA Capital Star, and Dennis Owens from ABC 27. They'll update us on news from the state capitol on Thursday at 7 p.m. It's debate time for the candidates running for State Attorney General. Eugene DePasquale and Dave Sunday will face off, courtesy WGAL-TV, Thursday at 8 p.m. here on PCN. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free on the internet. Go to PCNTV.com and check out our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is Everything Pennsylvania. We're a 501c3 nonprofit television network that relies on viewers and donors like you to help continue our mission. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Now, we're talking with our guests about the election, and we're talking about the presidential race specifically. And Mike Stack, I'm going to ask you about Kamala Harris's position and what her possible performance could be on the economy, because after all, that's what everybody's worried about.
Right. So I don't think that she's been specific enough in talking about what she's going to do for the economy. One of the things, of course, that she's saying is she's going to find a way to bring prices down for the things that people really care about. I mean, this is an electric issue for whether you're working, blue collar, or whether you're affluent middle class, just seeing the cost of the products in a supermarket or the other things that you want to buy from a retail standpoint. So her position has been she's going to find a way to bring those prices down, which is where she should be, but she hasn't delineated how that's going to be performed. And then one of the other things that she talks about for spurring the economy is giving tax credits to small businesses, which I always talked about as a Pennsylvania state senator and as lieutenant governor, because I think that's a great idea. But that alone is not something that's going to spur the economy in such a way that more folks are going to find reasonably high-paying jobs, and that young people who are continuing to incur large amounts of debt while pursuing higher education are not finding the high-paying jobs that are going to enable them to pay off those loans in a prompt way and then have a successful life and a successful job and be able to build a family and a future in Pennsylvania. But so she's been vague. She is correct in who she's appealing to, and it's just a matter of will the voters hold her accountable to the specifics. And so far, she's played it safe and said, "I'm not going to give specifics. I'm not going to get tied down on this, and you'll basically have to trust me that I care about the pain you're going through economically, and I'll get this country rolling and creating more jobs and lowering the cost of living."
Charlie, what can Donald Trump do for the economy? Be as specific as possible.
Well, let me just reflect for just a second on Kamala Harris, if I might, because Governor Stack is right. She hasn't provided specifics, and people want to know about those specifics. The two things where she has alluded to specific items were, one, price controls, where she talked about, quote unquote, price gauging.
Gouging?
Well, that's what she said, price gauging.
She did? Okay.
Oh, yeah, she said price gauging. She couldn't read off the teleprompter that day, I guess. But price controls haven't worked. We've tried them before. They lead to shortages. They lead to black markets. They simply don't work. And the other thing that she specifically talked about is a tax on unrecognized capital gains, which is perhaps the nuttiest thing I've ever heard of, economically speaking. Lots of people have 401ks. They can understand what it would mean to have a tax on any gain, even if they hadn't sold the particular instrument that they held. You just simply can't do that. It's like school property taxes here in Pennsylvania. What President Trump can and has done, and he's got a record of performance with the economy, which was singing when he was president, is to keep the tax cuts that he put in place, because the tax cuts worked. They stimulated economic growth, and they provided for a much lower rate of unemployment than we had ever had, particularly for minorities. They increased the take-home pay of Americans. They increased the value of a dollar for us. And the other thing that he can do and has talked about is to control the border, because the influx of illegal immigrants is impacting the economy in very negative ways.
Well, let's continue to explore that, Charlie. At the beginning of our program, we did an interview with a reporter, Evie DeJesus, and she did a story about a survey that was recently done in Pennsylvania. And this poll showed that Pennsylvanians preferred a path to citizenship over the choice of deportation. Which campaign lines up best with that? I'll put it to you, Charlie.
I'd want to see that poll, Larry, because as an immigrant myself and as a naturalized American citizen, and you don't get too many of them here on your show, I will say that most people draw a gigantic line in the sand between legal immigration and illegal immigration. And most people talk about a path to citizenship for legal immigrants. They do not talk about that for illegal immigrants who have broken the law, come here illegally, and whom presidents, including Barack Obama, were deporting. I think most people would say that President Trump's idea of deportation is the right idea. And as I hear in recent pronouncements, even Kamala Harris now agrees with deportation.
What do you think of that, Mike? And let me provide one more detail on this poll we discussed a while ago. 55% of the Pennsylvanians polled preferred the path to citizenship over deportation, often referred to as mass deportation.
Right. Well, so both of those terms sound harsh, one way or the other. Like a path to citizenship sounds very hopeful. And that's where we want to be in America, hopeful and supportive. And then forced deportation sounds very harsh and terrible. And we in America don't want to be that way. We want to be compassionate. But I do agree that I think more and more Americans are really concerned about this massive illegal deportation. People feel basically as citizens that they follow the rules, they follow the law, they do it the right way. And that's a core thing about being an American citizen. So folks who are sort of flaunting it at the outset, that's a troubling issue. So I believe that we should have some kind of path that folks who are seeking citizenship here in the United States should be able to follow. And George W. Bush, actually, as a former border president, believed that and was actually really rejected by his own party for coming up with that concept. But I think there should be a reasonable way to look at this thing where folks who are ready to follow whatever path you say, if it has a reasonable shot at getting them citizenship, they're going to be interested in following it, as opposed to sneaking in illegally. And then you have families getting torn apart because sometimes, that's unfortunate, but other times people hide behind the idea that, well, you can't, now that we're in, you can't separate the family and use it as a tactic. So I know that sounds harsh, but the bottom line is I think most Americans want a secure border, and they want a law enforcement to make sure that people are following the rules. That cuts across both parties.
Well, Mike, put it this way: is the Harris campaign embracing any of the ideals you just described here?
I think that it's a division that she senses that she wants to exploit, but as Charlie said, she's nuanced on it. She is not all on board with open borders. She has a very starkly different position than Joe Biden, and I think that she recognizes she's got a problem. That's why people were calling her the border czar. So she's taken a much more restrictive view on immigration than she has before. Politicians have done that throughout our history. And I too come from, grandparents who came to this country that risked everything, that spoke in accents. and but did it the right way. And I think we should definitely make sure that people follow the rules, and that inures to safety and to a better America.
Charlie, what has Donald Trump said recently about immigration, and has his stand on immigration changed at all during this campaign?
No, it really hasn't. I mean, he's said from the very beginning that the scourge of illegal immigration is something that has to be taken care of. It's priority number 1 or 2 on his agenda. It always has been. The American people know precisely where he stands. And Kamala Harris finds herself between the dog and the tree on this issue, because Governor Stack is right. She now wants to have a more nuanced approach. She wants to say, well, I could support deportation, and I, want to do this and that and the other thing, including building a wall, which she once said was immoral, un-American, etc. So she's really tried to have it both ways, saying, I wouldn't do anything different than Joe Biden, but what happened under their watch is absolutely clear to the American people. Over 10 million, think about that number, 10 million illegal immigrants came across the border while she was the quote-unquote border czar. That's simply unacceptable to the vast majority of Americans, regardless of how they want to handle that situation now that those folks are here.
Charlie, let's change our focus to another race that's important, and certainly it's represented on TV almost constantly, it seems, and that would be U.S. Senate. That's the contest of Democrat Bob Casey versus Republican Dave McCormick. Give us a short bio on Dave McCormick and what you think he brings to this race.
Dave McCormick, probably the most impressive candidate for the U.S. Senate in my lifetime. I mean, just an incredible record. Born in Pittsburgh, raised in Bloomsburg. His father was the president of Bloomsburg University before he became the chancellor of the education system here in Pennsylvania. My son went to Bloomsburg, so I'm a Bloom fan. Went to West Point. Highly ranked there, a wrestler, captain of the wrestling team at West Point, then went on to serve his country in combat with a record of distinction there as well, went into business, phenomenally successful, creating
What kind of business, Charlie, just briefly?
Well, he was in the money business. I mean, he was in the financial business and ran one of the largest finance operations in the world and created an awful lot of jobs here in Pennsylvania, did so very, very successfully, and a brilliant guy, not only educated at West Point at the military academy there, but also a PhD from nearby Princeton University.
Mike, what can you tell us about Democrat Bob Casey and what he brings to this race?
Well, Bob Casey is a household name in Pennsylvania. His father was governor. I worked for the administration back in the early 90s in a much lower level. But Bob has carried the family legacy, and he is a hardworking, blue-collar, connected to people politician. He's a very human, naturally likable man who has taken quieter approaches to things that people care about, but he's been right on and standing up for the little guy on price gouging, trying to raise the minimum wage, and he's taken a big different position than his father, who was sort of the leading pro-life Democrat, and actually was condemned for it at a lot of Democratic functions, including being barred from the National Convention. But Bobby is much more liberal on reproductive rights and supporting women's health. And I think he's known to voters. He's worked hard. He is a real person, as opposed to a billionaire hedge fund guy who spends most of his time in Connecticut. And I know that sounds like a Democratic hack shot, but the last race with Dr. Oz showed that the people in Pennsylvania, if there's one thing they can't stand, no matter what your credentials are you truly a Pennsylvanian? Or are you, is your foot someplace else and you're just here for opportunity? So I think Dave McCormick's going to have to keep skating that issue, and Bob Casey can keep pounding it, because there's no one who's a Pennsylvanian from Scranton like Bob Casey.
Mike and Charlie, we only have 2 or 3 minutes left. Sources of misinformation have taken a toll on trust in news media. How should voters manage all this information coming at them?
Just listen to me. I mean, that's really
Just listen to Charlie Gerow's version.
That's the penultimate source of truth, knowledge, and wisdom.
Let's say you're not available.
Maybe they can listen to Mike too. He's done a good job today. But no, I think it's tough to cut through all the clutter. I mean, these ads that are bombarding folks. But there are scorecards that are out there published by voter interest groups, and so where people have a particular interest in a particular issue, they can find out where someone has stood. I think there is an opportunity to do a lot of research online, something that wasn't available to voters not that long ago. So information is readily available if people really want to dig beneath the surface and, as I say, cut through the clutter.
There's just so much clutter, Mike. How about it? How do we get through that clutter?
My gosh, it's like, and I say that I don't trust a lot of the things that I see. I think a lot of PCN separately, the gold standard for information, but
agreed.
Like the major networks are all involved in getting folks agitated, instigated, and persuaded to wherever they want them to go. So I think that it's hard to trust the news that's out there, particularly when it's being bombarded, and then the individual campaigns with the high production value on these commercials. So I agree with Charlie. I've always thought it's up to the individual voter to go and do research, know who the candidates are to begin with, and do the research. And then even when you do the research, there's a lot to not trust out there. So it goes back to it's on you as the citizen to find out what's the true story and exercise your vote in a thoughtful, careful way without throwing it away. And the information's available if you seek it out, and I would urge everyone seek it out. Go and the last thing is make sure you vote, because when you talk to everybody by the water cooler about all your beliefs, or when you're walking down the street and you don't vote, it's as if you haven't said it. So make sure that you mail in your ballot or go to the voting place and execute, your privilege and right that people have died to give you.
Our guests have been Charlie Gerow, CEO of Quantum Communications, and Mike Stack, former Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania. Thanks for being here, gentlemen.
Great to be with
Thank
you,
you,
Larry.
PCN's Francine Schertzer talked to Rosalind Abbott, a biomedical engineer at Carnegie Mellon University, about meat that's grown in a laboratory.
We're joined today by Rosalind Abbott, Associate Professor of Biomedical Engineering at Carnegie Mellon University. You're co-leading a project to produce meat without sacrificing an animal. Can you explain for our viewers, what is lab-grown meat?
Yeah, so lab-grown meat is essentially making the same exact meat that you would buy in the store, but instead of using an animal to grow that tissue, we're creating it in the lab. So it's going to have the same cells, it's going to have the same structure as the meat that would normally be produced in an animal, but instead we are using techniques that were originally developed actually for regenerative medicine to grow cells, to grow tissues, in order to create that cultivated meat product.
So some very basic questions. Is it safe to eat?
Yes, yeah, it's the same thing as eating normal tissue or organs that you would from a cow or a chicken or anywhere else. So in fact, it actually may be more safe because we can control the environment a lot more, so you're not as susceptible to zoonotic diseases or other factors, and so it's a more controlled environment. So it has the potential to be even potentially more safe.
How does it compare nutritionally to traditionally, say, farm-raised chicken?
I think the researchers are really trying very hard to make sure that the nutritional content is the same. And I think it actually, again, has kind of this opportunity where we can actually tailor it to have even better profiles and more consistent profiles. If you're looking for better fats, for example, that's something we're really interested in recreating, that fatty acid, the healthy fatty acids in different meats. So we've got the same ability to kind of tailor it to improve it or to match it, depending on what the goal is.
Now, I've read about you working on projects related to chicken. Are there other types of meat also being cultivated at this time?
Yeah, so the ones that have made it through the regulatory pathways are chicken so far. So in the US, that's all that's made it pass. But people are working on cow, so trying to create beef products. I've heard of people working on fish as well. So things like salmon potentially could be coming down the line. And actually even more kind of exotic tissues as well. So I think anything that you could really think of where we can get the cell sources, you could create. But I think we'll see more and more variety actually hitting the shelves in the near future.
What initiated the desire to have these projects working on lab cultivated meat?
Well, for us, there's a lot of different reasons. So there's the environmental impact. Our current agricultural system uses a lot of land, uses a lot of water. It has high greenhouse gas emissions. I know in my lab, we're concerned with the ethical impacts too. So it's less animals that would need to be slaughtered. You can also think about how energy efficient it could be. So if we can design these labs in order to be more energy efficient, that would be really good. It would also help with food security. As I mentioned before, these agricultural products can be susceptible to different diseases. So potentially making a more stable product. And then actually there's a really poor feed conversion. So in order to actually grow the animal, you actually have to feed it a lot, and so that actually is less efficient, and you can also do it much faster if you're just growing one tissue as opposed to growing the whole animal. So there's lots of different reasons, and I think different people get excited about different aspects of it. And I know even in my team there are some people that do really love meat, and that's why they want to do it, and then there's some that are vegetarians. So I think there's lots of different reasons that you can get involved.
How does lab cultivated meat compare to, say, traditional chicken in terms of taste and texture and those type of things?
So I actually haven't personally tasted the chicken, but I have read reports that it tastes very similar, and they've even done studies where they've blinded taste testers and they can't tell. So this is all secondhand knowledge, but I have a feeling it's going to taste real similar.
States like Florida and Alabama have banned cultivated meat. What kind of arguments have you heard against it?
Yeah, so I think in the case of even in Pennsylvania, they've been thinking too. I think they're really concerned about the farmers. At least I know in Pennsylvania they are, but I don't think that's a big concern because we're not trying to replace meat, and I don't think we ever will, but I think we're just trying to give people more options. And there's also an increasing demand for meat. So I think that there's room for multiple products in this space and just giving people choices, like the Impossible Burger, for example, that didn't displace any farmers when it was introduced. And so I think that's one of the concerns, but I think that the farmers don't have to worry. There's plenty of demand for meat products. I think this is just going to give people more options. So that's one complaint that I've heard. I think also people sometimes don't know what the product actually is. And so I think education is something that's going to be super important so that consumers know what they're going to be buying and so that they can make an informed decision. And so sometimes when things are new, people don't trust them as much. And so we got to make sure that people trust the products that are going to make it to the shelves.
Since you brought up the issue of farmers agriculture is Pennsylvania's #1 industry, have you received much feedback from members of the ag community?
Yeah, actually, the grant that's funding the research in my lab, we actually have a farmer on that grant because I did want him to be part of the process, and I wanted to get feedback. And so actually, he's very supportive. And so we have talked to farmers, and they think that there's room for both, and I don't think we're ever going to actually displace them, as I said before. But I think they're important, and they have a lot of knowledge related to these products too that they can help to inform it. So yes, we definitely have been talking to farmers and getting their input as well.
Let's talk about the economics of it a little bit. How much does it cost to generate or cultivate meat in a lab compared to raising it on a farm? And what do you see as the economic impact from the consumer side as well?
Yeah, so right now I will say it's more expensive to grow the cells in the lab, but there's a lot of research into this space. So the main component that's very expensive is media, which is basically this fluid that has amino acids and different nutrients that is needed for the cells to grow and to proliferate, to expand in number. And so that's very expensive right now, but people are working on creating better alternatives for that so that could be cheaper. So in the future, that won't be as big of a deal. Right now, actually, as I mentioned before, that everything's been kind of with the regenerative medicine field in mind. And so the goal has been very different. And so the standards, I don't think, have to be the same for a food product. And so the media is a big expense, but that's something that people are working on. The other is kind of scaling up. So a lot of these are being produced in really small scale, so it's a lot more expensive. But as you scale up, that'll also decrease the price point. So right now it's definitely more expensive in the short term, but in the long term, hopefully it'll get to be similar.
When do you anticipate that lab-grown meat will be readily available to consumers?
I'm hoping soon. I think with this approval for chicken, I think that should be hitting markets very, very soon. I mean, I don't know what the time frame is for those companies, but I would say at least in the next 5 years for sure, if all goes well. So hopefully we'll be seeing it soon.
If someone's grocery shopping, how will they be able to differentiate between lab-grown meat and something that's cultivated from a farm?
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly how those labels will look, but I know that the community really likes the word cultivated because that's this idea of growing the cells, cultivating them. And so I think that that's a good term and that people have been using. And so I hope that continues to be a term as well, or maybe there'll be something better that comes along. But it will be labeled so people will know for sure. And so you can look out for those words.
Rosalind Abbott, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Before we go, I want to remind you that our series of one-on-one interviews with the candidates in the general election continues tomorrow. First at 8 p.m., we'll have Robert Calburn, Libertarian for PA Attorney General, followed at 8:30 p.m. by Rob McCurry, Republican for Congress in District 17. That's it for the PCN Captiol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Thanks for watching.